The man I built this multi-million-dollar firm with for 18 years just sat across my desk and told me I was nothing but a useless logo he was stripped off the wall. Marcus thought he was the genius engine stealing my life's work. What the arrogant bastard didn't know was that while he was demanding I sign over my rights, a federal fraud warrant was already sitting in my desk drawer. I had spent 16 months quietly building a cage for him, and he had just signed his own name to 47 counts of corporate forgery that will put him behind bars for life. You're listening to Revenge Blueprint, where we don't argue, we just destroy the vultures. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications right now. Do not blink, because the real bloodbath isn't how I sent him to prison. It's what I did to his entire family right after. My name is Carl Braddock. I'm 64 years old. I spent 24 years in the United States Army Corps of Engineers, retiring as a GS-14 civil engineer in 2009 after assignments at Fort Campbell, Fort Bragg, a 2-year posting in Germany, and 2 tours supporting infrastructure reconstruction in Afghanistan. In the Corps, I built things that were meant to last. Flood control structures, road systems, bridge approaches in conditions where the weather wanted to undo in one season what a crew had taken 3 to construct. I learned early that the quality of what you build is determined entirely by the standards you refuse to compromise, and that there is always someone on a project who wants you to compromise them. I want to be specific about what 24 years in the Corps actually means, because it tends to get described in a way that loses the grain. It is not a career of dramatic moments. It is a career of early mornings and technical reviews and site visits in November mud and the particular patience required to move a federal infrastructure project through the layers of approval it takes to go from a line on a drawing to a thing that stands in the ground and bears load. I learned to read soil and water and concrete and rebar. I learned to read specifications the way other people read novels, looking for the places where the language was imprecise, and the imprecision would eventually cost someone something. I learned that the engineer is responsible, not the contractor who built it, not the owner who funded it, the engineer who reviewed the design and stamped the document and said, "This is correct," and I accept professional responsibility for that statement. That is the specific weight of a PE stamp. I knew it the first day I used mine, and I have known it every day since. I came back to Chattanooga because Elaine wanted to come home. She had grown up in Signal Mountain, the ridge neighborhood that sits above the city and looks out over the Tennessee River Valley. And after 24 years of following me from post to post, Fort Campbell to Fort Bragg to Wiesbaden and back again, then 2 stretches apart while I was deployed, she had earned the right to name the next address. I did not argue with that. Elaine had the kind of patience that made argument feel beside the point anyway. I met Marcus Hewitt in 2007 at a Tennessee DOT contractors conference in Nashville. He was a licensed PE, running a small consulting practice out of Chattanooga, which is where Elaine wanted to go, and he had 20 years of experience with the regional client base I didn't have but would need. We talked for 2 hours at a conference dinner. He was sharp, organized, knew the local bid process inside and out. I respected the precision of his thinking. We stayed in contact. When I retired in 2009, and Elaine and I settled into the Signal Mountain house, Marcus and I started meeting for lunch regularly, working out the shape of a potential partnership. We opened Braddock and Hewitt Civil Engineering in March 2010, with 4 clients and a 2-room office on East Main Street, with a view of the river and a coffee maker that was too small for the amount of coffee 2 engineers required. I brought the Army Corps reputation, the federal contractor credentials, and a network of veterans-turned-civil engineers who needed reliable subconsultants. Marcus brought the Tennessee State relationship base, the local DOT connections, and the specific knowledge of how the Hamilton County Permitting Office worked that you could only get from having been wrong about it once. We were a good fit, genuinely good. The business grew the way businesses grow when the work is actually done well. By referral, without advertising, because people told other people. By 2018, we had 11 employees, a second office in Knoxville, and a portfolio of active projects that ran the range from municipal drainage systems to the Tennessee Valley Authority work that was, frankly, the most technically interesting work I had done since the Corps. We had built a firm worth building. What I did not say enough in those years was that I understood what we had built and what it was built on. I understood it. Marcus knew I understood it. But I did not say it the way a man needs to say certain things out loud, repeatedly. So they are part of the air in the room, and not just an assumption. I assumed Marcus understood that the PE stamp was mine in every real sense. My responsibility, my liability, my professional promise. He had his own stamp, and I assumed he understood the weight of it the same way I understood mine. Some assumptions are what you carry, instead of conversations you should have had. Elaine died in the summer of 2019. Not suddenly. Alzheimer's does not work suddenly. It works the way water works on limestone, steadily, invisibly, until the structure changes in ways you didn't notice happening. The diagnosis was 2015. The 4 years between the diagnosis and her death were the hardest years of my life, and I want to be honest about that. Rather than cover it in the careful language people use when they want to acknowledge grief, without taking up too much of the room with it. In 2018, she was still herself enough to have a good afternoon. Most days, she could still sit on the deck at Signal Mountain and watch the valley go through its seasons and tell me the things she noticed, the specific angle of October light, a particular cloud formation, the way the river looked on a still morning. She was losing the larger architecture of memory, but the small, precise observations, those stayed longest. She had always been a noticer. Even at the end, she noticed. I was splitting my time in 2018 between the office and the house, and it was not evenly split. There were weeks when I was at Signal Mountain for 3 days running, and the office saw me only on Wednesday and Thursday. The staff managed. Marcus managed the operational flow. I trusted that because the early pattern of our partnership had given me reason to trust it, and because I was managing the far harder logistics of watching my wife disappear from herself in small daily increments, and because there are only so many things a man can hold to full attention at once. She was gone by July 2019. 34 years of marriage. I have thought about her every day since. Not in the painful, acute way of early grief that passes, or at least changes shape. In the way you think about the person whose particular quality of attention was the most important environment you ever worked in. Elaine made me think more clearly. She asked questions that weren't the questions I had been asking. She noticed things I filed away as unimportant and turned out not to be. When she was gone, something in my professional life went quieter in a specific way, and I didn't register what was missing until much later. The drafting table. She bought it at an estate sale in Buncombe County in 2003 because she liked the adjustable surface, and she used it every weekend for years, filling small pieces of paper with watercolors of the kinds of things she noticed. The Signal Mountain deck at different times of day. The river. A single tree. She was not a great painter. She was an excellent looker, which is the thing that matters. When she died, I moved the table to the office on East Main Street. I could not have said exactly why, except that I needed to be near something of hers in the place where I was trying to keep going, and the table was the right size to be in the room without dominating it. It sits by the south window, in the afternoon light from the river. I look at it when I am thinking through a problem. I have looked at it most mornings for 5 years. Marcus sat on the edge of that table once in 2021 while reviewing some drawings, without asking. Without even noticing it was anything particular. I said nothing. I noted it the way I note things. In the drawer of my desk, in the top right corner, I keep a mechanical pencil, Pentel P205, the gray one, with the metal nose that my first real supervisor in the Corps, Colonel Haggerty, pressed into my hand on my first day in the field and said, "This is what we use here. Get used to it." He had been in the Corps since 1971, And he had the authority of a man who had built things that were still standing 20 years after people stopped thinking about them. I have used that pencil every working day since 1982. There is a box of 12 refills in the middle drawer. I go through about 4 a year. Over 40 years. That is a number I've thought about more than is probably reasonable. What I've concluded is that some habits are the measure of a consistency that matters, and some are just habits. The pencil is both. The letter from the Tennessee State Board for Licensing Engineers and Architects arrived on a Monday morning in November, 16 months before the April Thursday in the hook. It was addressed to me personally, not to the firm, which is the standard procedure for PE compliance correspondence. The return address was correct. The letterhead was the State Board's official format, which I recognized, because I had served on a technical review committee for the board twice in the 2010s and knew their materials well. The letter was a routine compliance inquiry. The State Board conducts periodic audits of licensed engineers' documented signatures and stamps, cross-referencing stamped documents filed with state and county agencies against the engineer's own records. It is not an accusation. It is a check. The letter asked me to provide documentation for a list of 47 design submissions stamped with my PE number over a period of 31 months. I had reviewed and stamped documents during that period. Some of them, the ones I could account for my own records, numbered 22. The remaining 25 on the board's list, I had no record of them. I had not seen them. I had not reviewed the designs they authorized. I had not signed anything associated with them. I sat at my desk and read the letter 3 times. The coffee in my mug went cold. Outside, the river was doing what the river does in November flat. Gray. Moving with the deliberate heaviness of something that has been moving for a very long time and intends to continue. I want to tell you precisely what I felt, because I think precision matters in this kind of telling. What I felt was not rage. It was not grief, though there were elements of grief in it. What I felt was the very specific recognition of a man who has spent a career understanding structural failure modes, who has looked at 1,000 drawings and learned to see the point where a structure will fail before it fails, and has just recognized that same pattern in something that was supposed to be his foundation. 25 documents. My professional seal. Design submissions filed with Hamilton County, Knox County, and the TVA without my knowledge or authorization. Signed in my name. Stamped with my number. A professional engineer's stamp is not a convenience. It is a legal certification. When you stamp a document, you are asserting that you have reviewed the design, that you understand the engineering, that the work meets the applicable codes and standards, and that you accept professional responsibility for the outcomes. It is the centerpiece of what makes an engineer accountable in the professional and legal sense. It is not something you use for efficiency. It is not something you use for a favor. It is certainly not something someone else uses without your knowledge and consent. I picked up the phone. I called Marianne Shelton. Marianne had been my attorney since 2012, when the firm had its first significant contract dispute with a subcontractor. She is 61 years old, ran her practice on Georgia Avenue, with one associate and a paralegal who had been with her for 23 years, and had the specific quality I prize most in legal counsel. She did not treat urgency as an excuse for skipping the careful work. She picked up on the second ring. I told her I had received a state board compliance inquiry. I told her I had 22 documents I could account for, and 25 I could not. I told her I needed to understand the professional and legal exposure before I made any other move. She said, "Don't contact the board yet. Don't say anything to your partner. Come in tomorrow morning." I said, "All right." I put the phone down. I opened my top right desk drawer and put the letter inside. I closed the drawer. I went back to the work I had been doing before the mail arrived and worked until 6 o'clock, at which point I gathered my things, stopped at the Waffle House on my way home, ordered coffee and eggs, and sat in the corner booth for an hour, thinking through what I knew and what I didn't. I did not call Marcus. I did not call Kyle. I drove home to Signal Mountain, made dinner, and sat on the deck in the November cold until it was too dark to see the valley. Marianne spent the first 3 weeks of December doing the work that needed doing before anything else could happen. She subpoenaed the county filing records. She requested certified copies of each of the 25 documents in question. She hired a document analysis firm to compare the stamps and signatures on those documents with authenticated samples of my signature and seal stamp from documents I had personally certified. And she made the initial contact with the state board on my behalf, flagging that a compliance inquiry had been received, and that I was cooperating fully while conducting my own preliminary investigation. The board's response was prompt. They assigned a senior investigator named Tom Caruso to the matter. He was 58, 15 years with the board, after a prior career as a structural engineer, and he had the manner of a man who has spent a career looking at things that didn't add up and has gotten very good at not showing what he's found until he's found enough of it. I liked him immediately. We met the week before Christmas at Marianne's office on Georgia Avenue. Tom had already done his own preliminary review. He set 3 documents on the table and asked me to walk him through them as though I had designed them myself. Tell him what I would have considered, what my standard approach would have been, what questions I would have asked before stamping. I looked at the first document. It was a drainage system design for a commercial property development in East Ridge. I had never seen it, but I had stamped hundreds of drainage system designs over a career, and I could read the engineering the way a reader reads a sentence. I walked Tom through what the design showed, where it was competent, and 2 places where I would have required revisions before I stamped anything. Tom nodded and made notes. He said, "You've never seen this document." I said, "I've never seen this document." He said, "Tell me who at your firm would have had access to your stamp and your signature." I said, "My partner." That was the first time I said it directly. It was the first time saying it made it entirely, irreversibly real. Tom closed his folder. He said the board's investigation would take time. These things required documentation from multiple jurisdictions, professional review panels, and the formal process for referring a complaint to the Attorney General's office if criminal exposure was identified. He said the timeline from formal complaint to disciplinary hearing ran 12 to 18 months on average. I said I understood. He asked if I could continue operating normally in the meantime. I thought about that for a moment. I thought about Marcus in the office on East Main Street. I thought about the 11 employees whose livelihoods depended on the firm continuing to function. I thought about the active contracts, the clients, the work in progress that needed competent engineering to complete. I said yes, I could continue operating normally. What I did not say, what I decided sitting in Marianne's conference room on a December morning, was that I was going to continue operating normally with the full understanding of what was happening, and that the 16 months ahead were going to be the most disciplined months of my professional life. I was going to do the work. I was going to show up. I was going to be every bit of the engineer I had spent 40 years becoming. And I was going to document everything, because documentation had been the language of my career, and I was still fluent in it. I drove back to the office. Marcus was on a call when I came in. He waved from behind his desk with the specific wave of a man who is managing 2 conversations at once and is confident he can handle both. I went to my desk. I made coffee. I opened the current project files and got to work. This was the 16th of December. The Thursday afternoon in the Hook was 16 months away. I want to say one more thing about that December drive back to the office before I go on. I have spent a career in a profession that asks you to be certain before you commit. The stamp goes on after the review, not before. You do not certify a design you haven't examined. You do not accept responsibility for a structure you haven't understood. The discipline of that profession, the specific discipline of not acting until the analysis is complete, has shaped how I operate in every context, not just the professional one. When I drove back from Marianne's office on that December morning and went back to work, I was applying the only discipline I knew. The analysis was not complete. The investigation had only just begun. Acting before the picture was clear would have been exactly the kind of error that 16 months of careful work was designed to prevent, an incomplete record that a good defense attorney could use to create ambiguity where there should be none. I made coffee. I opened the project files. I did the work. That was also what I needed to do, not as a strategy. And not only as a strategy as the actual thing that kept the business functioning and the employees employed and the clients served and the professional standard maintained. The work needed doing, and I was the one who knew how to do it correctly. I have thought about whether those two things, the strategic benefit of continuing and the genuine obligation to continue, can be separated. I don't think they can, fully. When two things point in the same direction for different reasons, you do the thing they both point toward, and you accept that both reasons were real. That is what I did. That is what I am prepared to say honestly about it. Here is what 16 months of knowing something you cannot yet say looks like. It looks like a Tuesday morning at the Waffle House on I-24. It has been my habit for years, coffee and eggs, the corner booth, before the morning traffic crests. I went every Tuesday during those 16 months. And every Tuesday, I sat in that booth for an hour thinking through where things stood without anyone to talk to about it. The waitress there, a woman named Sandra, who had worked that shift since before I started coming, always refilled my coffee without asking. She did not know me by name. She knew me by the corner booth, and the way I always had the eggs scrambled hard, and the way I always sat with a legal pad that I never wrote much on. It looks like sitting across the desk from Marcus at our weekly Monday status meetings and listening to him describe the work, his updates on the Knoxville projects, the Hamilton County bid he was preparing, the TVA liaison work, and responding with the professional engagement of a working partner, not performed warmth, not cold distance, the steady, functional relationship of two engineers reviewing common work. Let me give you a specific example, because I think the abstract description does not capture what those 16 months actually required. In February, 3 months after the letter arrived, Marcus and I drove together to a client meeting in Knoxville. It was a 2-hour drive each way. We talked the whole time about the project, about the client's concerns, about a scheduling conflict on another job. Marcus drove his Silverado with the particular comfort of a man who had made that drive 100 times. He made a joke about the Knoxville traffic that I had heard him make before. I laughed at the right moment. We had the meeting, which went well. The client was pleased with the project progress, had some questions about the timeline, left with the specific confidence that good consultants produce when they answer questions clearly and completely. On the drive back, Marcus said, "Good meeting. They really trust us." I said, "Yes, they do." He meant the firm. He was talking about the firm's relationship with the client, which had been built on years of competent work, on answered calls and met deadlines, and the small 1,000 professional courtesies that accumulate into trust over time. He was right. The clients trusted the firm. What he did not say, because he was not thinking about it in those terms, was that the trust was built on the standard that had my name on it. The PE stamp, my professional promise. Every satisfied client they had. I looked at the Interstate 40 ahead of us, going gray in the February afternoon, and I thought, 2 more hours. 2 more hours of this, and then the office, and then home, and then another Tuesday at the Waffle House, going over where things stood. This is what I want people to understand about those 16 months. I was not pretending. I was doing the job. The job had to be done, and I was the one who knew how to do it. And allowing the business to degrade while I waited for a process to complete would have been a different kind of failure. It would have punished the 11 people who came to work every morning without knowing any of this was happening. It would have harmed the clients whose projects had legitimate engineering needs. I was not going to do that. There is also an honest accounting of my own motivation that I owe you. I did not continue working normally purely out of obligation to the staff and clients. There was another reason, less admirable in some ways, that I want to name because this story deserves to be told with its full accounting. Every month I continued to produce excellent work alongside Marcus was a month of contrast. Every document I reviewed carefully and stamped with full knowledge of what I was certifying was a data point in the record Tom Caruso was building. The board needed evidence of pattern, not just 47 documents unauthorized, but a demonstrable difference in the quality and rigor of work done under proper review versus work done under his unauthorized use of my stamp. The 16 months gave them that contrast in the most undeniable way possible. I knew this. I was not merely patient. I was also producing evidence. Whether that makes my patience less admirable or more pragmatic, I leave for you to judge. What I will say is that the work I produced during those 16 months was good work, done correctly, for the right reasons. My motivation was mixed. My standard was not. What Tom Caruso and his team found, as the months went on, was not reassuring. The 25 documents became 31, then 39, then 47, which is where the final count settled. Spanning 31 months, covering 4 different jurisdictions, representing approximately $4.2 million in design fees, billed to clients, under the firm's name, with my PE stamp. As the professional of record, Marcus had not done this from the beginning. Marianne was careful to establish the timeline, and the evidence pointed to a first occurrence in the fall of 2018, which is the period when Elaine's condition was progressing rapidly, and I was spending 2 or 3 days per week at Signal Mountain managing her care. He had used my stamp once on a project that was genuinely urgent, where the timeline was tight and my absence had created a bottleneck. He had told himself, I suspect, that it was an expedient measure in an exceptional circumstance. He would tell me when he had a chance. He would ask for retroactive approval. He would handle it. Then he had done it again. Then it had become a practice. This is how people who are not fundamentally criminals become people who have done criminal things. They make one expedient decision and then have to make another to cover the implications of the first, and by the time they have made enough of them, the territory they're in looks nothing like where they started. I understood that. I am not in the business of pretending human complexity does not exist. But I am also a licensed professional engineer in the state of Tennessee, and my stamp certifies my personal responsibility for every design it appears on. 47 designs. I had not reviewed or approved a single one of them. Some of them, Tom found, had design issues. Not catastrophic ones, but in 2 cases, the drainage calculations were insufficient for the site's runoff characteristics, which meant that downstream structures were exposed to flood loads they had not been designed to accommodate. In one case, Hamilton County had already flagged a drainage problem at a commercial property. The owner had been told the system needed remediation. The cause had been traced to the original design, the design that bore my stamp. I received that information from Tom on a Thursday morning in May, 6 months into the process. I read the report at my desk. I set it down. I picked up the Pentel pencil and held it for a moment. Not writing anything, just holding it. Then I put it back down and made a phone call to Marianne. The damaged property owner did not yet know that the design engineer of record was me in name only. He would know eventually. That was part of what the process was working toward. But in that moment, sitting at the desk with the May sun on the river outside my window, I thought about what it meant to have your name on something you hadn't built and that had failed. A thing I had never done. A thing that bore my name because someone had decided that my name was convenient. That was the day the 16 months stopped feeling like discipline and started feeling like something closer to duty. Kyle drove up from Nashville on a Saturday in August. He teaches mathematics at a high school in Brentwood, 10th and 11th grade calculus and statistics. The point in a young person's mathematical education, where the subject either becomes real or remains an abstraction they will carry as anxiety for the rest of their lives. He has Elaine's patience with young people who are struggling, and my habit of asking whether the work is being done correctly, rather than whether the intention was good. He is a good man. We have gotten closer in the years since Elaine died than we were in the years before it, which is the specific arithmetic of grief that I did not anticipate but have come to understand. Loss sometimes removes the buffers between people and puts them in more direct contact with each other than comfort had permitted. We ate on the deck in August heat, the specific August heat of Chattanooga, which is not like other heat, which comes with a humidity that turns the air into something you can almost grip. He had brought sandwiches from a Nashville place he liked. We ate and talked about his school year starting, about a student he was worried about who was mathematically gifted and socially isolated in a way that reminded him of some of his own difficult years, about the drive up through Murfreesboro and the traffic on I-24. After the food was cleared and the sun had moved to the low afternoon position, I told him the whole thing. Not the truncated version you use when you're protecting someone from the full weight of something, the complete version, with the timeline and the documents and the investigation. Marianne Shelton, Tom Caruso, and the 16 monthly meetings, the drainage calculations that had already caused a problem in Hamilton County, the property owner who had been told his system needed remediation and didn't yet know why. Kyle is his mother's son in the way that matters most. He listens completely before he responds, not performed listening. Not the patient waiting of someone planning what they're going to say when you stop talking. Actual listening. The kind where you can see someone taking in what they're hearing and letting it change what they know. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the valley going dark in the August evening. "How long have you known?" he said. 8 months, I said. "You were at my place for Christmas. You knew then?" "Yes." He looked at me, not angry, thinking, "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I thought about how to answer that honestly. I needed to understand the full shape of it before I brought it to you. Incomplete information about something like this creates problems. You'd be carrying knowledge you couldn't act on. Knowledge that would change how you looked at him every time you saw him, before the shape of it was clear enough to be useful. That's not fair to you. He was quiet for a moment. "Also," I said, "I knew you'd want to do something. And there wasn't anything to do yet. There was only waiting and documenting, and I was the only one who could do that." He nodded slowly. He understood it. He was a teacher. He knew what it meant to hold information about a student that would change the relationship once it was known, and to have to manage the timing of that carefully, because timing in those situations determined outcome. "What happens to Marcus?" he asked. "He'll lose his PE license at minimum. Marianne says depending on what the AG's office develops in the financial review, there may be criminal exposure. The civil liability from the 2 substandard designs is a separate track." Kyle was quiet for a long time. The valley had gone to silhouette in the August dusk, the ridge lines black against a sky that was still holding the last of the light. "What happens to the firm?" "I'm buying out his 50%. The documentation of what he did is thorough enough that the buyout agreement will reflect a significant reduction in what his share is worth. Marianne is handling the structure. All 11 people stay? That's the intention. That's what I'm working toward. Who else knows? Tom Caruso and his team. Marianne. Now you." He looked at me. "When does it happen?" "When the board's process is far enough along that the formal action is ready. That's the point at which delaying the confrontation doesn't serve any purpose. Before that, it's still a work in progress. After that, it's a completed record." He got up and went to the kitchen without asking. He came back with 2 beers, Signal Mountain Brewery, the local one, because he always remembered that I preferred it. He set one on the railing in front of me. "Mom would have had something to say about this," he said. She would have had several things. What would she have led with? I thought about Elaine, about the specific architecture of her thinking. Practical first. She always ran the practical assessment before the moral assessment, because she believed you had to understand the actual consequences before you could say anything meaningful about the ethics. Then, the moral layer. Then, last. The emotional layer, not because she devalued emotion, but because she believed emotion should be arrived at honestly, rather than used as the starting premise. She would have said, 2 properties were damaged because of inadequate drainage designs. That's where we start. I paused. She wouldn't have started with what Marcus did to me. She would have started with the people whose property flooded. Kyle looked at the deck railing. That's right, he said. That's exactly right. We stayed on the deck until the valley was fully dark, and the city lights were visible below the ridge, the specific quiet of Signal Mountain at night that Elaine had called the best thing about living above the noise. She was right about that, same as she was right about most things. The partners' meeting was a Tuesday in April. I had scheduled it 2 weeks earlier, under the premise that I wanted to discuss the Glenbrook Bridge restoration contract, a significant TVA infrastructure project, the largest engagement the firm had ever pursued. It was a real contract. The bid was real. The discussion would have been a real discussion, had the meeting been what Marcus thought it was. The cover was legitimate in the sense that there was a real thing to talk about. There just wasn't going to be time for it. Tom Caruso arrived at 8:30. Marianne arrived at 8:45. I had coffee waiting for both of them. Tom was dressed the way he always dressed. For official board appearances, dark slacks, sport coat, the quiet authority of someone whose job is to arrive and be prepared and let the documents do their work. He had a folder with the formal board correspondence. He set it on the table and looked around the office the way a man looks when he is noting the physical details of a situation he will have to describe later with accuracy. He did not seem nervous. He had done this before, many times. Marianne was efficient in the way she was always efficient when she had been preparing for something for a long time. She reviewed the sequence with me once more. She said, "You're ready for this." I said, "I've been ready for 16 months. She almost smiled. She had the manner of someone who finds genuine satisfaction in a long-prepared action executing correctly. And I knew that manner because I had the same one. I want to tell you about the hour before Marcus arrived. The staff had been told to work from home. The HVAC excuse had been believed because it had been a recurring topic. The office was quiet, in the specific way it is quiet when the people who normally fill it are elsewhere. Not empty, exactly, but the kind of quiet that shows you the shape of the room without the texture of its ordinary occupation. I sat at my desk. The morning light was coming from the east, over the river, doing what it does in April when the angle is still low enough that it comes in long and direct across the south side of the office and lands on Elaine's drafting table beside the window. The oak surface was warm in the direct sun. The incline set at the angle she always kept it at. I looked at it for a while, the way I looked at it most mornings, without always having a reason. I thought about the work. Not the meeting, not Marcus, not the board or the civil liability, or what would happen in the next 3 hours. About the work itself. 24 years of the Corps, 14 years of the firm. The flood control structures and bridge approaches I had signed off on because I had looked at them, understood them, and accepted the responsibility. Every stamp, a decision. Every decision, a claim about what I had done. I had never stamped a document I hadn't understood. Not once in 40 years. I picked up the Pentel P205 and held it for a moment. The pencil that Colonel Haggerty had pressed into my hand in 1982 and said, "This is what we use here. Get used to it." The pencil I had used every working day since, through the Corps and the firm and 16 months of continuing to work carefully while the investigation built the record that would be complete today. I held it and looked at the drafting table, and did not think about anything in particular for about 15 minutes. Then Marcus pulled into the parking lot. He came in the front door with a bottle of champagne. Not immediately, he had it in a bag from a wine shop on Market Street. And he set it on the reception desk as he came in, already talking, already in the elevated register he uses when he thinks something good is about to happen. "Glenbrook," he said. "If we get Glenbrook, we're talking about a different level of operation. I've already been in contact with the TVA liaison." He stopped. He had seen Tom Caruso. Tom was sitting at the conference table with his folder open. Marianne was at the side table, her briefcase open, her attention on Marcus. I was at the head of the table, where I always sat, with my coffee and my legal pad. Marcus stood in the doorway. His expression went through several things in the 4 seconds before he sat down, and I watched each of them carefully, the way you watch a structure under load to understand where the stress is going. He sat down. He said, "Carl, what is this?" "Marcus," I said. "This is Tom Caruso, senior investigator for the Tennessee State Board for Licensing Engineers and Architects. This is Marianne Shelton, my attorney. You know why they're here." His jaw set. "I don't think I do." Marianne slid a copy of the board's formal complaint across the table. Tom had a second copy, which he had already annotated. I had the original, which I had been keeping in my desk drawer for 3 days. Marcus looked at the document. His hands were flat on the table. He did not pick it up. He read from where it sat. The silence in that room had a specific quality. Not hostile, not dramatic. Professional. The same quality as a site inspection, when the measurements have come back, and everyone at the table knows what the numbers mean. "I can explain the process," Marcus said. His voice was carefully controlled. There were time pressures on several of these projects. You were managing your wife's condition. I didn't want a burden. "Mr. Hewitt," Tom said, "I need to advise you that anything you say in this meeting may be used as part of the board's formal investigation. I'd recommend you have your own counsel present before you say anything further." Marcus looked at Tom. He looked at me. I said, "I'd listen to him, Marcus." Marcus sat for a long moment. He looked at the champagne bottles still in the bag on the reception desk, visible through the open conference room door. Then he looked at the table. "How long have you known?" he said. "Long enough," I said. "Tom's been working with me since December." Something in his face moved. Not guilt exactly, more the specific expression of a person who has been running a calculation in his head and has just gotten the final answer and doesn't like it. "The first one," he said, very quietly. "The East Ridge Drainage Project. You were at the hospital with Elaine. The county needed a stamped submission that afternoon. I was going to tell you." "I know," I said, "but you didn't tell me." "No," I said. "You didn't tell me." There is a specific silence that happens in rooms where the most important thing has already been said and everyone knows it. Marianne and Tom understood it. Marcus understood it. I had been waiting 16 months for it. I reached into my desk and pulled out the Glenbrook bid file, the real one, the complete technical package I had been building for 6 weeks. I set it in the center of the table. "Glenbrook is real," I said, "and I'm going to win it, but not with you on the letterhead." Tom presented the formal process. Board investigation, formal hearing, the timeline, the rights of the respondent, the requirement that Marcus surrender his PE stamp pending the outcome. There was no argument. Tom had done this before. The paperwork was complete. Marcus stood after about 40 minutes. He was composed in the specific way a person is composed when the composure is the only thing they have left. He looked at me once at the door. He said, "The firm was good, Carl." I said, "Yes, it was." He left. The champagne bottle stayed on the reception desk until the next morning, when Sandra from the front office arrived and I told her to throw it away. She did not ask any questions. She had been with the firm for 9 years and had the particular quality of a good professional. She understood that some things that happened at work were not her concern, and she was at work to work. I stayed in the office until 7 that evening. Tom and Marianne had left by 2. After they went, I sat at my desk and reviewed the current project files for about 2 hours, going through each one the way I always went through project files methodically, with the attention it required, making notes in the margins with the Pentel pencil. The work was the same work it had been the day before. The drawings were the same drawings. The calculations had the same calculations to verify. Nothing about the engineering had changed because of what had happened in the conference room. That was, in its way, the most useful thing I did that afternoon. Not the 16 months of preparation, not the confrontation itself, not the board proceedings that were to come. Sitting at my desk on the afternoon of the day Marcus Hewitt was formally confronted with what he had done and doing the engineering work correctly for the clients who needed it done correctly. That is what the profession requires. I was still a licensed engineer in the state of Tennessee. I still had work on my desk that needed doing. I did it. At 6:30, I locked the office and drove up Signal Mountain. I made dinner. I sat on the deck in the April evening, which in Chattanooga is the specific kind of April evening that makes you understand why people who live here stay the air warm enough and the ridge quiet enough and the valley below lit up in the particular way that makes the city look like it was placed there deliberately to reward the people who chose to live above it. I thought about 30 years of a profession, about what it had cost and what it had produced, about Elaine on that deck every evening for 5 years before she died, watching the valley, telling me what she noticed, about Kyle teaching mathematics in Brentwood and making the drive up on Saturdays when I needed him to, which was more often than I told him, about 11 employees who had shown up this morning expecting a normal work day and who would come back tomorrow with a different understanding of what they were part of, about Marcus saying the firm was good at the door, about the fact that it was, about the fact that it still is. Here is what I have been sitting with since April. The first thing, I am not without fault in this story, and honesty requires me to say so plainly. I was not present in 2018 the way I should have been. The work of caring for Elaine was real and necessary, and I have no regrets about prioritizing it. That's not the issue. The issue is what I delegated and what I did not. I delegated workflow management to Marcus during that period. I did not delegate professional oversight. The distinction matters enormously in an engineering firm because professional oversight is not a responsibility that can be delegated without explicit agreement and documentation. I had allowed a gap to open in my accountability structure, and Marcus had stepped into that gap in a way that he initially told himself was helpful and eventually became something much more serious. Could I have caught this sooner? Yes. I should have been reviewing the firm's stamped submissions list quarterly and comparing it to my own records. I had done that early in the firm's history and had gotten out of the habit when things were running smoothly. Auditing your own professional paper trail is exactly the kind of maintenance task that gets deferred when you're busy with other things, until you find out why it should never be deferred. I found out the hard way. The letter from the state board in November did what I should have done for myself every quarter. That is not an excuse for Marcus. It is an honest accounting of where I was responsible for my own exposure. I am a licensed professional engineer with 40 years of experience, and I let a critical monitoring function lapse during a personal crisis. That lapse created the conditions Marcus used. The use was his. The lapse was mine. Both are true. The second thing, I have thought about whether the 16-month timeline was the right approach, and I want to be honest about the answer, because the honest answer is complicated. Marianne never pressured me to move faster. Tom Caruso's investigation required the time it took. These things cannot be rushed if you want a result that holds up. The 11 employees needed the business to function, which meant I needed to continue working. All of that is accurate and would be sufficient on its own to explain the timeline. But I want to be honest about a fourth reason. One that makes me look less like a patient man and more like a strategic one. Every month, I continued to work beside Marcus during the investigation. Was a month of documented contrast. Every document I reviewed and stamped correctly during that period was evidence of what my oversight looked like when it was actually applied. Every clean project file from the 16 months was a data point that made the 47 unauthorized documents stand out more clearly by comparison. I was not purely passive during those 16 months. I was also building a record, deliberately, with full understanding of what it would be used for. I am not certain that motivation is admirable. It is accurate. Whether patience and strategy can inhabit the same 16 months is something I have been thinking about since April. My conclusion is that they can, provided the strategy doesn't corrupt the patience. The work I did during those 16 months was good work, done correctly, for the clients who needed it done correctly. The fact that it was also evidence does not make it less good, but I want to name it honestly rather than present myself as a purely principled man doing excellent work for selfless reasons. The third thing, and this is the one that stays with me most, is what Marcus said at the door. The firm was good. It was. I want to be honest about that because it is true, and because honest accounting requires it. The 18 years before 2018 were good years in a real sense. We built something that functioned, that served clients well, that grew because the work was actually done well and people said so. The TVA work that I am proudest of, the structural assessment on the Hiwassee Dam secondary spillway in 2016, which was the most technically challenging problem I had worked on. Since leaving the Corps, Marcus contributed genuinely to that work. His knowledge of the regional permitting system and his relationships with the county engineers saved us time and money that I would not have been able to save alone. That was real. His contribution was real. What happened later was also real. Both are true simultaneously, and I have had to hold them both without resolving them into a simpler story. The man who worked beside me competently for 18 years is the same man who used my professional stamp 47 times without my knowledge. Those are not two different people. They are the same person making different choices in different conditions, and understanding that is more useful than the simplification in either direction. I have thought about the specific failure sequence, what I described earlier, as a recognizable pattern from failure analysis. One decision that seemed manageable, followed by another to cover it, followed by enough repetitions that it became normalized. This is, as I said, how levees fail and how bridges develop fatigue cracks. But there is another way to describe it that I think is also accurate. It is how a competent to abases, because acknowledging the original decision would require accountability they are not ready to accept. Marcus was, in many ways, a capable engineer. He was not willing to be wrong. When he did something wrong, he needed it not to have happened, and the easiest way to make a thing seem like it didn't happen is to continue as though it hadn't. That is a character flaw. But I have been around long enough to know that character flaws are not exotic. Most people have some version of the reluctance to acknowledge their own errors. What differs is the magnitude of what the error enables. Marcus's error happened in the context of a professional stamp that carried legal weight and accountability for real structures in the physical world. The magnitude was consequential in a way that many errors are not. I want to say something to anyone who has a business partner, a colleague, a person whose professional conduct is in some way attached to yours. Audit your exposure. Not once a decade. Every year. Every quarter if the stakes are high enough. The review of what has been stamped with your credentials, what has been signed with your name, what has been authorized with your authority. That review is not paranoia. It is the baseline maintenance of professional integrity. I stopped doing it during the hardest years of my life, and the consequence was 47 documents I had never seen bearing my professional promise. The maintenance is not optional. The fourth thing is about Elaine. She had a quality I have mentioned before, but I want to be specific about it here rather than general. She watched people the way a structural engineer watches a bridge under load, not looking at the surface presentation, but at the behavior under stress, the pattern of response when something unexpected happened, the specific way a person managed the gap between what they wanted to appear to be and what they actually were when circumstances became inconvenient. She said something in the early years of the firm that I had filed away and not retrieved until this year. She said Marcus was a man who related to competence, the way some people relate to property, as something to be claimed and defended, rather than earned and continuously demonstrated. She said it without judgment. The way she said most of her precise observations, as information, delivered once, available to be retrieved later. She said she thought he would be a good partner as long as the firm was growing and everyone's status was comfortable, and that she was less certain about how he would behave in a situation where the status was unclear. She was less certain for good reason. After the April meeting, after Marcus had gone and the office was quiet again, I sat at her drafting table for the first time. Not to use it, just to sit at it. I put my hands on the surface the way she used to put her hands on it when she was thinking about a painting she hadn't started yet flat. Palms down, feeling the temperature of the wood, which was warm from the afternoon light through the south window. The river was visible from that angle. The full curve of the Tennessee bending south toward Moccasin Bend. The same river she had looked at from this window for 5 years. The same river I had looked at for 14. I sat there for maybe 20 minutes. Not doing anything in particular. She saw this coming. Not the specific facts. She didn't have the specific facts. She was gone before any of this started. But she saw the shape of it. She told me what she saw, once, clearly, without dramatizing it. She trusted me to retrieve the information when I needed it. I retrieved it 16 years after she said it. That is what I mean when I say she still sees correctly for me. The observation she made in 2008 was still accurate in 2022 and was still being confirmed in 2024. That is a specific kind of intelligence, the kind that sees not just what is present, but what will be true given what is present. Elaine had it about people. She had always had it. I loved her for a great many things, and that was one of them. There is one more thing I want to say about what those 16 months cost, because I have been honest about most things, and I want to be honest about this. I lost a friend. That is the simplest way to say it. Marcus Hewitt was not a man I liked in every way, and he had done something that I cannot excuse or minimize, but he was a person I had spent 18 years alongside. And there is a texture to 18 years of shared work that does not disappear simply because the work turned out to have a layer of fraud underneath it. The early years were real. The legitimate engineering was real. The client relationships we built together, the ones that are now entirely mine, were built on actual work we actually did. What I mourn, if I am being precise about it, is not Marcus Hewitt. I barely know him now. What I mourn is the version of the partnership that existed before 2018, before his first decision, and his second, and the 47 that followed. That version was good. It produced good work. It was built on real complementary strengths. That version is gone, and it would have been gone whether or not the fraud happened, because the fraud was the revelation of a character problem that was present before 2018, present when Elaine noticed it in 2008, present through all the years of the partnership, and that character problem would have surfaced eventually in some form regardless. I am 64. I have lived long enough to understand that you can grieve the loss of something that was good, while also fully acknowledging that it had to end, and that the ending was correct. These are not contradictory. They are both true. The firm is mine. The clients are mine. The standard is mine, it always was. But now, the record matches that reality. The 11 employees are still showing up every morning, doing their work, growing in their capabilities the way people grow when they are given good work and clear standards and the space to develop them. Davis has his PE license, and a pencil refill, and the beginning of an understanding of what the stamp means. That is a kind of continuation that I find more meaningful than I expected. Elaine used to say that the best structures were the ones that looked the same from the outside after they had been repaired as they did before they needed repair. The repair becomes invisible because it was done correctly. The structure just continues being what it was built to be. I think about that. The Tennessee State Board formal disciplinary hearing was held in September. Marcus appeared with his own attorney, a Nashville practitioner who specialized in professional licensing defense. The documentation was complete, and the outcome was not in doubt. The only question was the scope of the sanction. After a 3-hour hearing with testimony from Tom Caruso, a technical review by 2 engineering experts the board had retained, and my own presentation of the 47 documents with specific analysis of each, the board revoked Marcus's PE license. Permanent revocation, pending a petition for reinstatement that required a minimum of 5 years and evidence of remediation the board would assess on its own timeline. The civil liability process is ongoing. The Hamilton County property owner has been reasonable in discussions. The other situation is more complicated, and I'll let Marianne handle the details without editorializing here. The Hamilton County District Attorney's Office opened a preliminary criminal inquiry into the unauthorized professional seal use in October. As of the time I'm telling this story, that process is ongoing. What I will say is that the documentation Tom Caruso and I assembled over 16 months is thorough. It is the most thorough documentation of anything I have done in my professional life. The buyout of Marcus's 50% share was completed in July, negotiated with the assistance of Marianne and a business valuation expert who assessed the firm's value, accounting for the liability and reputational damage associated with the 47 unauthorized documents. Marcus received approximately 30% of what his share would have been worth absent the misconduct. He did not contest the valuation in the end. He had been advised, I expect, that contesting it would involve a more detailed public airing of the facts than was in his interest. He signed on a Wednesday morning at Marianne's office. I was not there. There was no reason for me to be there. The documents were complete. Marianne called me when it was done. I said, "Thank you." I went back to reviewing the Glenbrook specifications, which were due to the TVA at the end of the week. In August, I renamed the firm. It is now Braddock Civil Engineering, which is what it had always been, in the sense that actually mattered. The work I did, the standards I kept, the professional reputation built on engineering that was actually reviewed and actually signed by the person whose name was on it. The name change required new letterhead, a new website, and notification of all active clients, every one of whom remained on contract through the transition, which I take as the most significant data point in the whole sequence. I moved Elaine's drafting table to the conference room in September, where the afternoon light from the river hits it even better than it did in the office. I placed the new firm's business registration certificate on the table the day it arrived. Not hung on the wall, on the table, the way she used to lay out a new watercolor sketch before she started. Flat, in good light, in the space where the work was going to happen. Kyle drove up the weekend the name change was official. We ate dinner on the Signal Mountain deck. The October evening mild, and the valley going through its slow darkening. And he asked how I felt about it. I said, "Like the work is mine again." He nodded. "It always was," he said. "Not on paper. You know what I mean." I did know what he meant. He meant the standard. The standard had always been mine. The work done under Marcus's unauthorized use of my stamp had been done without the thing that made my name worth using, which was the oversight, the review, the application of 40 years of professional judgment. My name had been used. The standard had never transferred. What was restored in August was not the standard that had never left but the public record of it. I said, "Your mother would have had 4 things to say about this." He smiled. "What were they?" "First, the property that flooded is the part that actually matters, Carl. Everything else is paperwork. Second, I told you something was off with how he handled authority. You listened for a moment, and then got busy. Third, calling Marianne before you said a word to anyone was exactly right. Fourth, stop sitting on this deck feeling correct, and go make sure the Glenbrook bid is solid. Kyle laughed the laugh that starts in his chest, the one that sounds exactly like her. 4 things, he said. She always had exactly 4. We stayed on the deck until it was fully dark. It is January now. The Tennessee River is doing its winter thing lower and clearer than summer, moving with the particular visible weight of cold water carrying whatever the mountains above have given it. From the conference room window, on a clear morning, you can see all the way south to where the river bends toward Moccasin Bend. Elaine's drafting table is in that room now, in the afternoon light where it belongs. I want to tell you about a morning last month, because I think it is the right ending for this story. Davis, the 29-year-old engineer who had come to me after the staff meeting, wanting to understand what had happened, got his PE license in November. He passed the exam on his first attempt, which is not guaranteed, and which tells you something about the specific quality of preparation a person brings to a test they have decided to take seriously. He had studied for 6 months with the focused attention of someone who understood that he was studying not just for the exam, but for what the exam was the gate to. He brought the notification letter to my office the morning it arrived. He set it on my desk and stood there, not quite knowing what to do next, in the way people stand when they have accomplished something they trained a long time for, and the accomplishment has actually arrived. I looked at the letter. I thought about what I had said to him after the staff meeting, when he had come to my office wanting to understand professionally what had happened. I had spent an hour explaining the weight of a PE stamp, the specific professional and legal meaning of it, the way it was not documentation of work but a claim about a person. He had asked whether that was why I had kept coming to work every day like nothing had changed. I had said, the work still needed doing. He had said, that's a kind of commitment I want to understand better. I had told him, that was the right thing to want to understand. I thought about that conversation now, looking at his license letter on my desk. Then I thought about Colonel Haggerty and 1,982 and the weight of what was being handed to Davis in this moment. The authority to certify engineering work in the state of Tennessee, the professional promise carried by a stamp that would now have his name on it. I opened the middle desk drawer. I took out one of the refill cartridges for the Pentel P205, the gray kind, the standard one, the same cartridge I had been ordering in 12 packs since the first year in the Corps. I held it out to him. He looked at it. He was uncertain about what it was, exactly. You're going to need pencils, I said. This is what we use here. Get used to it. He looked at my face. He understood it was more than that. He was smart enough to understand it was a transmission of something, even if he couldn't name precisely what, and smart enough to receive it without needing it explained. He took it. Thank you, he said. Not for the pencil. You earned it, I said. Not the pencil. He went back to his desk. I went back to mine. The Glenbrook bid specifications were on the screen, and the detail work was waiting, and there was engineering to do. That is the whole thing. I have been a licensed civil engineer in the state of Tennessee for 30 years. In that time, I have stamped somewhere between 600 and 700 documents. Every one of them received the review it deserved before my name went on it. Every one of them represents a calculation I made, a standard I applied, a responsibility I accepted in the genuine professional sense of the word. Some of the work was exceptional. Most of it was solid and competent. A few pieces I would do differently today, not because of error, but because the field advances and knowledge accumulates. That is the nature of engineering and the nature of any honest practice. You build to the best of what you know at the time, and you keep improving what you know. What you do not do is put your name on something you haven't looked at. That is the line. It is not complicated. It has not changed in my 30 years. It will not change in whatever years I have left. What you also do not do is let someone else put your name on things without your knowledge and oversight. even with the best intentions at the start, even in a crisis, even when the work they're doing might be technically adequate without your review. Your name on a professional document is the claim that you reviewed it, that you accepted responsibility for it, that if something failed, you could explain exactly what you examined and why you concluded it was sound. Without that review, your name is not documentation. It is a false claim. 47 false claims. With my name, that is what 16 months of careful, quiet, methodical process was built to address. Not to punish a man who made a sequence of bad decisions, to restore the record to what it actually was, to make the documentation match the reality, which is the specific purpose that professional engineering standards exist to serve. The Glenbrook Bridge restoration work begins in March. Davis will be lead engineer on the structural assessment phase. I will be the PE of record, which means I will review every document before my stamp goes on it, which means I will apply my professional judgment to the work, which means I will know what my name is certifying. That is not a burden. That is the whole point. I have never wanted it to be anything else. I go to the Waffle House on I-24 most Tuesday mornings still. Sandra refills the coffee before I ask, the way she has for going on 15 years. Last Tuesday, she said, without preamble, that I seemed lighter. I said I felt lighter. She said, good. Then she went to the next table. That was the whole conversation. It was sufficient. Sandra has the gift of sufficient. She knows when nothing more needs to be said and acts accordingly. The Pentel pencil is on my desk. The refills are in the middle drawer. The box will last another 2 years approximately, and then I will order another, and the pencils will continue being useful in the specific way they have been useful for 40 years, as the instrument between my hand and the question of whether what I am reviewing is correct. It is January. The river is clear. Kyle is coming in February. He is going to drive up on a Saturday, and we are going to work on the Signal Mountain deck, which needs some boards replaced after last summer, and I am going to teach him how to read the grain of the replacement boards to find the right orientation before you fasten them down. He has never learned this, and it is time. He has his mother's patience and my hands. He can learn it. On Saturday morning before he arrives, I am going to make Elaine's biscuits the cast iron skillet, the specific ratio she kept in her head, and that I have had to reconstruct from watching her and from 3 years of trial and error since she died. I am getting closer to it. I am not there yet. Some things take the time they take. That is the whole lesson. Not triumph. Not satisfaction at watching something fail that deserved to fail, though that is part of it, and I won't pretend otherwise. The lesson is simpler. You keep the standard. Every day, every document, every decision that only you will know about, because no one is watching. You do the work correctly, because the work deserves to be done correctly, and because your name on it is a promise, and promises mean something. And what you have built in that way holds, not because you announced it would, but because you built it day by day, every review, every stamp, the whole length of a career. Measure twice. Know what you're building. Keep the standard. That's all. If you stayed all the way to the end, hit the like button, subscribe to Behind Dad, and share this with someone who has spent a life building something worth protecting. And I want to leave you with this question, because I've been sitting with it since January. Has someone ever benefited from your absence not maliciously at first, just because you weren't watching? And how far did it go before you noticed? Drop your answer below. I'll read every one. Stay steady. Do the work. Keep the standard. This story is fictional and created for entertainment purposes only. Any resemblance to real persons, events, or locations is coincidental.